Andrew Williams.
Mr Chairman, I'd like to rise again to respond to some of the comments of the Minister on behalf of New Zealand First. He mentioned about the local authorities and the councils that this would move some of the responsibility off onto the builders and the building industry and the homeowners, and he sort of implied that basically the councils and the local authorities, in a sense, we're not responsible and we're not the ones that should oversee and make sure this was the case. Mr Chairman, I unfortunately don't necessarily agree with that, because we have a situation here for the last 20-odd years in this country of ongoing systemic failure within the building industry. It's been a culmination of really a litany of errors over many, many years, which allowed, for instance, that the building code be lowered, that the Standards New Zealand allowed a change of the standards of the building code, which at the end of the day, this Parliament, this House oversees all legislation, all laws within this country. So in a sense, these bodies, which are quasi-government organisations in a sense, still have to report back in terms of those standards in the building code and everything else. At the end of the day, it is this House that determines the final legislation that covers them. Therefore, it's disappointing to hear from the Minister who says, well, basically, it wasn't the government's fault back in the 90s or whatever. You know, it was other bodies and other quangos and other government organisations. It was their fault. At the end of the day, it is the legislators that determine at the end of the day on behalf of the people of New Zealand. So I'm very disappointed to hear that, because I feel in this House we have to ensure that what we bring through in this House is in the best interests of the people of New Zealand and does deliver to them safe housing and buildings that they can live in or work in, or commercial buildings that they can feel safe to be in. Mr Chairman, we've heard some astonishing stories from the Christchurch Royal Inquiry in recent weeks, and more comment coming through, including from very learned expert witnesses, saying that great concerns about some of the methods that have been undertaken in terms of some of the structures and building in Christchurch, and resulting in catastrophic failures in many cases. We must, Mr Chairman, ensure that what we follow through on with this number 3 bill and then the subsequent number 4 bill continues to provide the adequate protections for the people of New Zealand and for all our citizens and residents. Mr Chairman, the Minister mentioned that many of us wouldn't get on a 737 and fly if we didn't think there was a registered licensed pilot flying it. Well, the same sort of people probably thought the same thing when they got on the Costa Concordia for their cruise in the Mediterranean. They thought the captain was licensed and able to steer them safely through the Mediterranean waters. Sadly, something like 20 to 30 people did not come back as a result of that cruise. They worked on the basis that they thought the regulators and the legislators and the people controlling the waterways of the Mediterranean and the legislative side would be making sure that the standards were maintained and kept to ensure that they were safe. Likewise, Mr Chairman, we as a House and as Parliament must ensure that what goes through this House ends up in very, very good legislation to ensure that safety is the highest priority and that our building code is kept to the highest priority. Mr Chairman, the Minister also mentioned in terms of the local authorities not really being responsible for signing off and seeing the final end result. That was the responsibility of the builders. But at the end of the day, Mr Chairman, those local authorities were approving sign-off of buildings that were built in accordance with the building code, that were using air-dried, untreated timber, that were using monolithic cladding in an unvented situation, that were using sealants around windows to seal windows, where in the old days you'd put decent flashing and you'd put decent overhangs. We're putting sealants which, after 7 or 8 years with our ultraviolet light in this country, simply just break down and start allowing the water in. They were approving on the basis of the standards that were set, that were allowed for in the building code, and therefore certainly while the local authorities were mindful of approving building structures to that code, they were not mindful of what the results would be from many of those products that with time, with weather, with ageing, with movement of the New Zealand types of soils, the hills, the clay and all that sort of thing, were not fully aware at that time of what the result would be from that. Mr. Chairman?
Andrew Williams.
Just in closing, I'd just like to say I think this is a very much a shared responsibility. We can't go from one extreme to another. We can't go from a situation where it is only the council's last man standing who have had to take the brunt of much of this, to a situation where let's try and put most of the onus on the building industry and the end consumer. Because if we go from one extreme to the other, Mr. Chairman, we could end up in a situation where we say, why did we really do that? Why did we take it away, a lot of the responsibility from ensuring the regulators and the people who were ensuring that there were codes of compliance and that the buildings did comply with the standards? Why did we put it onto an industry where, as we've heard today, a lot of concerns about how skilled are some sections of our building industry? Have they gone through the necessary licensing? Have they been approved? Are they still waiting in a queue to try and get a licence? And do we want to put so much pressure on that side of the industry that we could end up in a situation in years to come where we regret that we went too far, too soon and too quickly? Mr. Chairman, I'm a bit concerned that there is a piecemeal situation to this bill, that we seem to be adding on. This is number 3 bill, and the Minister has said that much of this will be addressed in the number 4 bill. There seems to be a lot of legislation happening on the hoof here. We're seeing increasingly more and more of this sort of coming through the House where, we'll work on it with the next bill and we'll get it right with the next bill. Too often that's happening in this House, Mr. Chairman, and I think in this situation perhaps we need to take a breath and say, having heard the results of the Christchurch inquiry, the Royal Inquiry, having heard what's gone on in the likes of Pike River, having heard what's gone on in other disastrous situations around New Zealand, do we want to push this through at such haste and find that we regret it later, or do we just want to breathe the air and make sure we get it right?
I'll put the questions. The first one is in regard to the Minister's amendment set out on SOP number 11. So the question is that the Minister's amendments be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Members requesting a party vote, the clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
59 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party.
14 votes opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Maori Party.
3 votes in favour.
Mana.
1 opposed.
Act New Zealand.
1 vote in favour.
United Future.
1 vote in favour.
Any other votes?
The ayes are 64, the noes are 57. The amendments are agreed to. The question now is that Part 1 as amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question now is that no one was seeking a party vote there. Someone wants a party vote. The clerk will conduct a party vote. Please call loudly.
New Zealand National.
59 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party.
14 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Maori Party.
3 votes in favour.
Mana.
1 opposed.
Act New Zealand.
1 vote in favour.
United Future.
1 vote in favour.
Any other votes?
The ayes are 64, the noes are 57. Part 2 will stand as amended. Part 1, sorry. Part 1 as amended will stand. We come to the debate on Part 2, which is clauses 78 and 79. So the question is that Part 2 stand part. So the question will move to the Minister's amendments. The question is that the Minister's amendment set out on SOP number 11 be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Party vote? Clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
59 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party.
14 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 opposed.
Māori Party.
3 votes in favour.
Mana.
1 opposed.
ACT New Zealand.
1 vote in favour.
United Future.
1 vote in favour.
Any other votes?
The ayes are 64, the noes are 57. The amendments are agreed to. So the question is that Part 2 as amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Party vote. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand National.
59 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 opposed.
Needs to come now.
Green Party.
14 opposed. 14 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 opposed.
Māori Party.
In favour.
Mana.
1 opposed.
ACT New Zealand.
1 vote in favour.
United Future.
1 vote in favour.
Any other votes?
Ayes are 64, noes are 57. Part 2 as amended will stand part. So we come to the question on the schedules. First one is the Minister's amendment set out on SOP number 11. Question is that the Minister's amendments be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. Party vote? Clerk will conduct a party vote.
On the schedule.
On the schedules, yeah. Well, he's asked for a party vote.
New Zealand National.
59 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 opposed.
Green Party.
14 opposed.
New Zealand First.
8 opposed.
Māori Party.
3 votes in favour.
Mana.
1 opposed.
ACT New Zealand.
1 vote in favour.
United Future.
1 vote in favour.
Any other votes?
The ayes are 64, the noes are 57. The amendments to the schedule are agreed to. So the question is that the schedule as amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. We come to the debate on clauses 1 to 3. The question is that clauses 1 to 3 stand part. Clause 1 stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Their ayes have it. The question is that the Minister's amendments on clause 2 as set out on SOP number 11 be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that clause 2 as amended stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that clause 3 stand part. Those of that opinion will say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. I shall report this bill with amendment.
Jolly good job.
Members, the House is resumed. Mr Chairman.
Mr Speaker, the committee has considered the Customs and Excise, Joint Border Management, Information Sharing and Other Matters Amendment Bill and reports it without amendment and divided into the following bills: Customs and Excise Amendment Bill and Biosecurity Amendment Bill. Mr Speaker, the committee has also considered the Building Amendment Bill number 3 and reports it with amendment. Mr Speaker, I move that the report be adopted.
The question is that the report be adopted. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The bills are set down for third reading next sitting day. Call on Government Order of the Day number 3.